When a king woke up in the dark, he wondered if he was really dead. He'd never believed in the light at the end of the tunnel or those strange moments after a near-death experience, where people would exclaim they'd seen the light as cold sweat rolled down their faces. The king found himself in a dark tunnel, with no idea how he had died. The last thing he remembered was being alone in his room, looking out over the city. Then, his body grew heavy as he lay down on his bed, and he began to suspect he'd been poisoned or assassinated. Many enemies had wanted him dead, but even as a king, there was nothing more he could do. Death had come, and all he could do was accept it. When his eyes opened, he realized he had just been born. His parents looked at him with loving eyes. Strangely, he could understand their language, which was a good sign. His father waved at him, while his mother got angry, telling him their son had only just been born. He felt everything around him was quite normal, but was surprised to see only a few different types of clothing. His mother, Alice, held him in her arms, and he wondered where he really was. The months passed, and his mother, Alice, was a gentle, kind woman who always kept a firm hand on the family. His father, Reynolds, was reliable and charming, though a bit childish at times. Though he was grateful to have been born into a loving family, his life was filled with hardships he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. He had almost no control over his body, and his bodily functions were completely unmanageable in this new form. Every time his mother changed him, he felt incredibly ashamed. The years he'd spent forging the iron will of a king, a representative of his nation, along with the faint hope that this was all just a dream, were the only things keeping him sane. It seemed he had been sent back to the past, to a much more ancient time, and he wondered if people in this era regularly carried weapons with them. He realized that suspicious-looking vials people called medicine were being sold legally. He was strolling through the market with his mother, and she asked him if they should head home. He wanted to say no, but he couldn't. Knowledge was his strength, and over the past few weeks, he had been carefully observing his surroundings, confident that he now understood what was going on. Suddenly, his father appeared from the side, picked him up, and tossed him into the air. His mother screamed, worried he would fall, but his father caught him and laughed heartily. He was frustrated with his small, weak body. His father said that when he was a boy, his own father used to do the same thing, playfully tossing him into the air. In the process, his knee hit the wall, which hurt and made him cry. His mother, being a healer, immediately healed his wound. He told himself that perhaps he'd spoken too soon. Because it was possible, all of this was simply because he knew nothing about this world. Regardless, in his past life, he was a king who led armies that everyone obeyed. He had fought in many battles and defeated champions from nations across the world. Of all his achievements, he had never been as proud as he was at this moment, crawling across the floor. His mother worried he might hit his head on the corner of the table, while his father asked her to block him from getting near the bookshelf. He crawled toward a mirror on the wall, and as he looked at his reflection, he saw his parents beaming because their son was looking in the mirror. Months had passed, but he still wasn't used to his new name. As a king in his past life, Art felt the name was a bit too cute for him, but looking at his reflection in the mirror, he couldn't deny that he was, in fact, very cute. He was sure that in the future, he would conquer many hearts. That night, while he was sleeping, his mother kissed him and left the room. But as soon as she left, he opened his eyes and began to carry out his plan. He threw the blankets off the bed and tried to climb down to the floor. Then he jumped onto the blanket, thinking that his mother, Alice, had left while he was sleeping. He only had about an hour before she came back to check on him. He stealthily snuck out and headed for the study. He was delighted to have completed his mission, because ever since discovering this place, he had been sneaking in every night to learn more about this world. He discovered that Dicathan, the continent where he was born, consisted of 3 main kingdoms. Eleanor, the kingdom of elves, located deep in the forest. Darv, the vast underground kingdom and home to the dwarves. And Sapin, the kingdom of humans, which was the most populated land. However, both this world and his old one had a monarchy, but here, power wasn't seized but passed down from one generation to the next. He soon realized that this world was very primitive compared to his old one. The reason for the stunted technological development was magic. Opening a book titled A Beginner's Guide for Privileged Mages, he recalled that in his old world, they had a life force energy called Kai, which was used by martial artists to strengthen their bodies and weapons through rigorous training. This world had a similar force called mana. Unlike Kai, which only existed inside the body, mana was present everywhere around them. The power to control mana was mainly hereditary, and only about 1 in every 100 children possessed this ability. However, mana could be used in various ways, the two most common methods being augmentation and conjuration. Augmenters used mana to enhance their bodies, giving them incredible strength, defense, and agility. However, their weakness was their limited range. Conjurers, on the other hand, emitted mana into the world, allowing them to bend their surroundings to their will. However, they had to draw mana from the outside world into their mana core to form spells. His mother was what people called a deviant, a rare type of mage who could conjure special healing mana by emitting it externally. According to the book, a mage's first awakening usually occurred during their teenage years, when their mana core manifested. This sounded very much like Kai, the power from his past life. Children were taught to meditate to create Kai, as scattered fragments of ki in their bodies would gather into a single point. He wondered if this could work in this world. He sat down, tried to focus his Kai, and soon realized that it was actually working. Suddenly, Alice approached, hugged him from behind, and said she was worried about him. She found his expression a bit strange and asked if he was having trouble pooping. He was about to begin his journey to become the greatest mage in this world, and here she was thinking he was just a constipated baby. He let out a fart, and Alice, thinking he was fine, realized it was time to change his diaper. He felt embarrassed for soiling his diaper. Right when he was concentrating, 2 years passed. Alice felt like she understood her son more each day, and she concluded that Arthur, her son, was definitely the cutest child in the world, with his auburn hair and blue eyes that looked at her so intelligently. She knew that if she didn't become a strict and reliable mother, her son would be in trouble in the future, unlike her, who could rely on her husband, Reynolds. Later, Alice went outside and was shocked to see that Reynolds had put Arthur in a thick sweater. She glared at them, which scared them. She had caught Reynolds trying to teach the child how to fight when he couldn't even crawl steadily yet. She took Arthur to the market, and the boy rushed towards the weapon shop. Alice noticed that Arthur loved going to the strip of small shops in the center of Ashburn, rather than just buying groceries once or twice a week. They usually went to the town center every day, where Arthur loved to visit the merchants' shops. She didn't think she was spoiling the boy, but she wanted to make sure they always had fresh food at home. And it also served an educational purpose. Seeing Arthur grow up so quickly, she wondered what he would be like when he was older. With Reynolds as his father, she had no say in him continuing his work as an adventurer. However, she couldn't stop worrying about him. She could only hope that Reynolds wouldn't get any foolish ideas like turning their son into an adventurer. She thought she could at least do something about the boy's habit of sneaking into the study. She had once wanted Arthur not to focus too much on the study, but that was a story for another day. Then she closed the journal and left the room. On the other side of the door, Arthur was standing by the window, looking out at his father training. About 2 years had passed since the boy began his difficult journey of learning, and he had learned so much since then. However, every day brought new and interesting things to discover. Arthur watched as Reynolds chanted a spell for a few minutes, and then concentrated with intense focus. Suddenly, he felt pressure build in his hands and used it to move a boulder across the ground. Arthur wondered what kind of magical phenomenon his father had used, and couldn't help but be amazed at what he was able to do. Reynolds tried out some combat moves in front of Arthur and asked if he wasn't awesome. Arthur thought that his father had just spent 3 minutes of absolute concentration to throw an object that he could have tossed with much less effort. Just then, Alice came over and asked if he was watching his father. However, she was upset to see that Reynolds had ruined the front lawn. Once again, Arthur realized quite early on that his father was an augmenter, and he wondered what he would become when his own mana core awakened. His father meditated and trained with absolute focus, and they both watched him in silence. Afterwards, Arthur turned to go back, but was afraid he might fall off the table, so he moved backward and tried to crawl off the table. His mother noticed one of his eyes was drooping shut and thought that he might need a nap. He tried to head towards the study, but his mother didn't listen to him and said that it was time for his nap. He had no other choice but to demand that she bring him a book. When she didn't listen, he started to push and kick her. His mother got angry, but finally gave in, saying that he could play in the study for a little while. Arthur walked away, thinking that this did not diminish his dignity, as a great warrior must use every weapon in his arsenal. He began to study the books, while his mother watched him quietly. Suddenly, she heard a noise from outside and thought Reynolds had broken another tree. She left the room and went outside to check. As Alice left, Arthur began to meditate, thinking that his greatest achievement, besides accumulating knowledge about this world, was his progress in forming a mana core. He had spent the last 2 years moving tens of thousands of tiny mana particles inside his body and gathering them near the center of his abdomen at what's called the solar plexus. Seeing how slowly the mana particles moved toward the center of his body, he could understand why it usually took until the teenage years to form a mana core. It was a grueling task, both physically and mentally, but the past 2 years had not been wasted. Meanwhile, Reynolds had accidentally crashed into a tree and was trying to save it, while Alice watched him, laughing loudly. At that same moment, Arthur was trying to place the final particle into his mana core. Suddenly, an explosion erupted inside the house. Alice and Reynolds were horrified and stunned by the devastation. Reynolds saved Alice from the blazing fire, but he was badly injured in the back and asked if she was okay. However, Alice remembered Arthur, the child who was still inside the house. Reynolds got up, rushing back inside to find his son. Reynolds powerfully threw the door open. Once inside, he was stunned by what was happening and suddenly burst out laughing. Alice came over and asked why Reynolds was laughing. Reynolds replied that Arthur wasn't there, but that he was meditating on his mana core. After a moment, Reynolds stood up and felt amazing. It felt great to have a mana core. He felt like the trees around him were beautiful. But suddenly he realized the devastation around them. He wondered if they had been attacked, and who would dare destroy the home of a king. Another year passed, and during that time, with his mother, Arthur learned how to read and write. He learned the basics of mana control and augmentation at first. Because his body was too small for combat training, they did basic physical exercises. He also went on walks with his father to do these exercises. Before long, when his father felt he was ready, he decided to let him train and bought him a wooden sword for his 3rd birthday. One day, while he was studying in his room, Reynolds came into the house and said it was time to train. He brought the sword with him and took Arthur outside. He told him to remember what he had learned and to try to sync his mana flow with his breathing. Just like a heart or lungs, the mana core was just another organ in the body. Reynolds wondered if most 4-year-olds would understand such abstract instructions. They began their actual combat training, and Arthur tried to attack, but Reynolds dodged the sword every time. Reynolds told him to give it his all, and Arthur said with determination that he wouldn't let him rest until he succeeded. He only had a little time to learn before dinner, so he decided to put all his strength into one final attack. He attacked with all his might, breaking Reynolds' wooden sword, leaving him completely stunned. Arthur asked if he could go inside and study now, and Reynolds happily let him go inside. That same night, while Arthur was meditating, he thought about this world. He realized that the color of a mana core would reflect a person's strength. The mana core starts out black because blood and other impurities in the body mix with the mana particles to form it. As the impurities are gradually filtered out over time, the mana core becomes purer, and its color changes from black to red to orange, yellow, silver, and then white. Each stage is divided into dark, gray, and light shades. The brighter it is, the purer and more powerful the monocore. Suddenly, Arthur heard his mother calling from outside, telling him to come for dinner. He reluctantly went out, thinking that he couldn't get any privacy here and wondering how he was ever going to study. Meanwhile, Reynolds called out to Alice and said it was time to find Arthur a proper teacher. Alice stood up angrily and said that he was only 4 years old. And besides, he had already said he could teach him. Reynolds also stood up, saying he never expected their son to be such a genius at manipulating mana. To be able to control mana so well at just 4 years old, he couldn't let their son waste his talent. They had to give him a chance. Alice protested, saying she didn't want her son leaving home for a city hundreds of miles away. But Reynolds said that Xyrus was no ordinary city, and he would make sure his friends took care of Arthur. They argued while Arthur watched in silence. Finally, Arthur slammed his hands on the table. Reynolds asked him if he wanted to go to a big city and have a real teacher. Arthur was stunned that his father was letting him decide, and wondered if this was too much to ask of a 4-year-old. Arthur asked if they could all go to meet the teacher together. The two of them looked at each other in silence, and Arthur wondered if he'd said something wrong, or if his words had been too complex. They laughed, and Reynolds said they hadn't even considered the whole family going together. Alice said she would feel more at ease if she were there when he was tested and met his teacher. Reynolds stood up and announced that they were going to Xyrus City. Arthur was stunned to hear his parents were already preparing for a 3-week journey. That same night, as Arthur was reading a book, Alice appeared, snatched the book from his hand, and told him he needed to go to sleep because they were leaving early in the morning. Arthur protested, saying that tomorrow was too soon. Alice didn't like rushing either, but their friends from the Twin Horns were also going to Xyrus, so they would all travel together. His father was with them now. Alice kissed him on the head and said that if she caught him staying up late to read again, there would be trouble. You can bring some books for the trip tomorrow. Arthur knew the Twin Horns had been in the area for a while, even helping rebuild their house when they had time, from what he'd heard. The group, consisting of 2 conjurers and 3 augmenters, would help them deal with any problems they might face on the journey. At last, Arthur was leaving this quiet little village, and it was time for him to explore the real world he now lived in. The next morning, the family began their journey. Reynolds thanked Adam and his group for accompanying them on the trip and offered to introduce his son. Reynolds called Arthur over and asked him to introduce himself. Arthur politely introduced himself as Arthur Lewin and thanked them for accompanying them to Xyrus. Adam was impressed with his demeanor and asked if he was really Reynolds' son. Adam was an augmenter who specialized in the spear. The woman hugged Arthur tightly and said he should be thankful he takes after his mother. Her name was Angela Rose, a conjurer specializing in wind magic. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. A man from behind told her she was suffocating the boy. Durden Walker, who specialized in earth magic, Durden Walker gently placed Arthur on the ground. Arthur looked around and noticed that their group had one more member named Jasmine Flamesworth, who specialized in daggers. She didn't say a word to him and walked away. Another woman, Helen, told Arthur not to mind Jasmine, saying that she just needed time to warm up to people. She introduced herself as Helen Shard, a user of archery magic. Reynolds announced that everyone was acquainted and that they had to prepare to continue their journey. They loaded their belongings into the carriages and prepared to set off. The journey began, and Arthur hoped for a bright future ahead. At night, they were attacked by several monsters, which they eventually defeated. Afterward, they used the wolves for dinner. They stopped at a spot to eat dinner, and Helen asked Arthur if he was okay. But he was just looking at Jasmine. Helen said this was his first time traveling like this. And he thought to himself, it was certainly his first time traveling in this life. Helen continued, saying his father had been bragging almost the entire way that he was a genius mage, and asked if he had really awakened a year ago. Adam stood up, saying he needed to move around a bit before going to sleep, and he said that he'd been practicing combat with his son. He asked Arthur if he'd mind training with him, even while thinking to himself that he should just train alone. Reynolds warned Adam to be careful since they had only just moved from light strength and mana exercises to actual sparring. Adam grabbed Arthur's shirt and dragged him along, while Reynolds and Alice could only look at each other worriedly. Arthur thought that normal children his age couldn't even climb a flight of stairs, but he guessed no one here thought it was unusual to fight him. Adam pulled him aside and asked if he was ready, then asked if he knew how to augment his weapon. Adam advanced with his tiger attribute. Arthur looked towards his father and communicated telepathically that this man was trying to kill him. He asked his father to help him get out of the situation. Reynolds cheered him on, telling him to go ahead and fight Adam back. Seeing that his plea had no effect, Arthur prepared to fight. He gripped his sword like an experienced veteran. He focused his mana core into a single point and then rushed towards Adam to attack. Adam used a defensive skill to dodge Arthur's attack, but then he suddenly vanished from sight and reappeared from behind. Arthur prepared his next attack, but his child's body wasn't strong enough to execute such a powerful blow. He swung his sword, but Adam dodged it and countered. Arthur ducked to avoid Adam's attack. Arthur jumped up, lunging towards him. Adam lost his balance and nearly fell, and Arthur saw his chance, trying to take advantage of it to strike him again. Adam dodged Arthur's attack, then got up and attacked again, hitting him with a light staff. At that moment, Newton's third law of motion suddenly popped into Arthur's head. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Arthur fell to the ground and Adam lunged toward him to attack again. Alice screamed her son's name, Model, and Adam asked Arthur if the backlash hurt him. Arthur stood up, and Durden pushed Adam away. Adam demanded to know what kind of training Reynolds had put the boy through to create such a little monster. Reynolds laughed and said that he didn't teach Arthur anything, and Alice tried to heal her son, asking if this was what he had learned. Arthur replied that he learned it from watching his father and reading books. Adam asked if Arthur was going to teach him a few movement techniques. Arthur showed him that he just needed to cross his back leg over his front one, then use mana to kick out while leaning his body almost all the way back. Adam followed Arthur's instructions, but instead of learning the technique, he ended up crashing into a tree. A few days had passed since they started their journey to Xyrus City, and Arthur's birthday had also come and gone. During that time, he received a lot of birthday presents, and he learned many lessons from his companions. Adam and Durden were bathing in the river, while Arthur, Helen, and his father continued to train and had made considerable progress. They enjoyed the trip and the surprises it brought for Arthur. Jasmine had succeeded in learning some techniques. Arthur was still surprised by Jasmine's abilities, as she picked up his instructions so quickly, especially when learning the first step. After a while, they all changed their clothes and prepared to continue their journey. Alice called out to Arthur and said that they were about to set off. The journey continued, and as they traveled, a monster was watching their carriage from a distance. Adam told Arthur that he still remembered how his father used to get them into all sorts of trouble. Helen called out to Adam and asked if he was sure Reynolds was the only one causing trouble, and told him a story about a time he had messed everything up. Adam laughed loudly and boasted that it was just a small mouse. Alice yawned and Arthur asked if she was okay. She replied that she just felt a little tired. Arthur opened a book to study, but was bothered by someone. He wasn't happy to see Jasmine watching him and asking him to teach her more. He ignored her and continued to read his book. When they heard a noise from outside, everyone was surprised and wondered what was happening. Helen revealed that bandits were attacking them and told everyone to prepare for a fight. Angela took the lead, telling everyone to yield to the power of the wind, follow her will, and group up to protect one another. Many arrows rained down on their carriage at once, and Alice protected Arthur, shielding him. Angela's wind skill helped deflect many of the arrows. Finally, Arthur observed that everyone fought with great skill. While Durden snapped an arrow with his bare hands, everyone stood their ground, defending their designated positions. However, Helen was hit by several arrows, but was saved by her armor. She jumped from the carriage and rushed out, ready to attack the bandits. Arthur and Alice were worried because they were completely surrounded by the bandits. They were on a mountain, and the bandits were charging towards their carriage. The bandit leader appeared and praised his men for catching such fine prey. He ordered them to leave only the women and children alive and to try not to injure them. After all, he said, damaged goods would only sell for a lower price. Arthur thought that perhaps he had been living in a shell for too long, and he had almost forgotten that every world has its ugly side. He was furious as he thought about the bandits. Alice held him tight and told him not to worry, saying she would be there to protect him. Arthur felt reassured by her words. Meanwhile, the bandits continued their fierce assault. Durden ordered everyone to gather and form a defensive line. They tried to create an earth wall for protection against the arrows, but some still managed to get through and were heading straight for Alice and Arthur. Angela appeared just in time, using her wind ability to redirect the arrows and protect them. The bandit leader and two of his men moved forward to attack them. But Helen fired a volley of arrows all at once, pushing them back. Durden also fought bravely and took down many of them. Some of the bandits grew fearful as they watched him fight. Reynolds also fought courageously, moving nimbly and defeating many of them. He had caught two of them and was fighting them, when a bandit appeared from behind, ready to strike. An arrow from the side hit the bandit before he could attack. Reynolds was relieved to see that Helen had saved him. They all continued to fight, everyone giving it their all, and Adam had defeated a great number of them in the process. He was a great warrior, piercing through multiple bandits with his sword. Helen was no less impressive, leaping up and striking down several enemies with her blade. Meanwhile, a bandit charged at her, but she moved quickly, dodging his attack. The bandit lunged again, saying he would train her until she had no choice but to stay with him. Finally, he threw a rope at her, but she nimbly dodged all of his attacks. However, she was injured in several places and was at a disadvantage against her opponent's long range. Arthur watched the situation and wondered if he should help her, but he realized there was nothing he could do against an adult augmenter in his current body. Meanwhile, the bandits attacked their carriage again, and Reynolds was injured. Alice and Arthur were horrified to see his condition, and they saw him glaring furiously towards the bandit leader, who was silently observing them. Reynolds asked Alice to heal him, but Arthur noticed something was wrong with his mother. Alice revealed that she couldn't heal him, and Arthur wondered why his mom wasn't healing his dad. Reynolds said that he was fine, that the wound wasn't life-threatening. Reynolds told Arthur to listen carefully, explaining that as soon as his mother used her healing magic, the bandits would immediately target her. He said he could handle their leader, but he was worried about protecting them. Reynolds ordered Arthur to take his mother back the way they came and not to stop for anything. Arthur refused to leave him, saying that he could fight and save everyone. Reynolds placed his hand on Arthur's head, telling him to listen carefully. He said he knew Arthur could fight, which was why he was entrusting his mother to him. Reynolds asked him to protect his mother and the baby in her womb. He recalled that his mother seemed a little tired because she was pregnant. Reynolds said they were planning to tell him when they got to Xyrus, but now they wouldn't be able to make it there anymore. Arthur promised he would save his mother. Reynolds told him to get ready because they had 4 mages with them. Meanwhile, the leader of the bandits recognized Alice's abilities, and he ordered his men to capture her immediately. Arthur quickly took Alice and fled, while Reynolds tried to hold back the bandits to protect them. Arthur thought that his father couldn't possibly die to these bandits. Adam also ordered everyone to move towards them and protect the family. A bandit lunged forward to attack, but Adam stopped him and told everyone to run, saying he would hold the man off. Everyone started running towards the mountains. But another one fired an arrow. Arthur noticed the arrow and managed to deflect it with his wooden sword, but the arrow was so powerful that it broke the sword and injured his hand. The bandit was surprised that a child could dodge his attack. Meanwhile, Helen shot the bandit from the side and took him down. She told Arthur not to stop and to keep saving his mother. Arthur felt something was wrong and thought that there were supposed to be 4 mages fighting. He counted the mages during the fight and could only find 3, unable to locate the 4th. The bandit leader ordered his men to forget the original plan and kill everyone, including women and children. Arthur wondered who he was talking to. and he was stunned to see a giant whirlwind flying through the air. The whirlwind attacked them, and Arthur thought that even if he could use mana to dodge, his mother wouldn't be able to avoid it in time. Suddenly, they lost their balance and both fell to the ground. Arthur thought that if he couldn't escape, he had to take the mage down with him. He charged into the whirlwind at full speed and tried to strike it with his sword, but ultimately decided he had to get inside the whirlwind. He broke through the whirlwind and jumped up to attack the mage. He hoped the mana thread he had created would hold, and it kept his mother tethered. He was hanging from the cliffside, while his leg was injured. The mage was also dangling from a ledge, and the rocks he was holding onto were about to crack. A moment later, they crumbled, and the mage fell. Alice grabbed one end of the thread and tried to hold on to him. Durden appeared and used his skill, creating a stone hand which saved Arthur. Arthur was about to fall and thought that the others would be okay. He closed his eyes, disappointed that he would never see his brother from his past life again. He remembered a morning when he woke up and he left his room, but the servants were frightened when they saw him. He walked past the balcony, where everyone was welcoming the king. After that, he entered the council chamber, where an old man was already waiting, and the old man was surprised to see him. He began to stare at a painting, lost in thought. The council was the gathering place for the people who truly ruled the country, managing its politics and economy. In a world rife with problems like declining birth rates and limited resources, wars had been replaced by duels and armies by kings. He was one of them, and he admired the old man's masterpiece. The old man stood up and said that while being a council member was a worthy position, he couldn't lie and admit that he was also jealous of the fame and glory the kings received after each victory. He asked the reason for his unexpected visit. However, he took off his gold medal and placed it on the table. The old man was stunned by his action, but the king left the room, saying that he was retiring. He had spent his whole life becoming the strongest, but he couldn't find peace. He was still an orphan with no one left to love. He was willing to give up everything he had in this life just for a chance to go back to Ashbur and see everyone again. He couldn't forget the memories he had made with them. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a forest and wondered if he was still alive. Arthur saw the mage's corpse lying next to him and turned his face away. He was so badly injured he couldn't move, and he passed out again. After a while, he woke up, and he tried to get up, but his wounds were too deep, making it impossible for him to move. He saw some food pellets in the mage's bag, so he struggled to reach it and ate one. After eating, he felt a little bit of energy, and he lost consciousness again. The next morning, when he woke up, he felt a little better. He tried to stand up, but his body was too weak, and he fell down again and closed his eyes. A few days later, he was able to walk again and went over to the mage's corpse to get the dagger. He looked towards the high mountain he had fallen from, wondering how he could have survived a fall from there. He wondered how long he'd been here, but he knew he had to keep going and find his parents. Suddenly, he was startled by a voice asking if he was awake. He turned to find the speaker, thinking the mage's corpse was talking to him. The voice continued, asking about his condition. He moved closer to the corpse and tried to touch it with his wooden stick. The voice told Arthur not to worry, that the corpse wouldn't come back to life if he was afraid of it. Arthur felt relieved, but then realized he shouldn't trust the disembodied voice, no matter how soft and majestic it sounded. He asked the voice who it was, and if it was the one who had saved him. The voice replied that yes, it had saved him, and that he would find the answer to his first question when he reached its home. Arthur remarked that the voice sounded confident to even dare to come and find him. It replied that only it could help him get home from this place. Arthur thought of Reynolds, Alice, the twin horns, and his unborn sibling. He wondered if they were okay, or if they had made it to Zyra safely. Then, he named the voice Mr. Voice, and asked if he could trouble them to show him the way, so that he might be lucky enough to meet them in person. She laughed and replied that he caught on pretty quickly, but that calling a woman Mr. was incredibly rude. Arthur wondered how she knew his name, and she replied that she would show him. Suddenly, He felt a red light envelop everything, and he quickly covered his eyes to protect himself from it. Miss Voice scanned the area and advised Arthur to leave immediately, since it would be safer to travel during the day. Arthur followed her instructions, and he felt his body's condition gradually improve, with only a few aches and pains left here and there. In the afternoon, he couldn't help but think about the kind of magic she had used to save him from the fall. He wondered how she knew they were going to fall and why she had only saved him. The more he tried to figure out a reason, the more questions he had, so he decided to let it go and let things happen naturally. After a while, he came to a body of water and quickly jumped in for a bath. He felt so relaxed. And after his bath, he washed his clothes. Miss Voice laughed and said he was quite easygoing and carefree, but told him not to worry because she wasn't watching him. He was so embarrassed that he just stood there naked for a long time before putting his clothes back on. Miss Voice apologized for startling him. Arthur continued on his journey. He drank some water and ate some food. Since he had fallen down the mountain eastward, he thought he might be near the Elven territory, but he didn't see any of the mist that the Elshire forest was famous for. He kept walking, and his fear of passing through areas full of wild beasts was gradually eased by the fact that only a few small animals appeared. However, he was surprised not to see any mana beast, even though the area was incredibly rich in mana. He regretted not being able to stay and absorb some of it, but he knew he had to keep going and couldn't delay. He had to get back to his parents quickly, especially since his mother was pregnant, and the stress from fearing he was dead could be dangerous, even harmful to her unborn child. He also needed to know if they were still alive. After a while, Miss Voice said she was glad he had reached a safe place, and Arthur thanked her for her help. He picked up a stone and shook it, pretending it was Miss Voice. She said that she wasn't an emotional cluster of rocks, and that he would find her in the rift. Arthur saw a light emanating from a boulder and went inside, thinking about his parents. Once inside the boulder, Miss Voice reminded him to watch his step. Arthur stepped on a rock, but it cracked and sent him falling. Arthur fell into the light, and he quickly hit the ground in a strange place. He got up, thinking that Miss Voice should have warned him he was about to fall 2 stories. He stood up and tried to walk, but this time he stumbled down some stairs. When he looked up, he was stunned by what he saw in front of him. A monster-like creature. The creature was delighted to see that Arthur was actually here, but he was terrified. She approached him and told him to close his mouth, or else bugs would fly in if he kept it wide open like that. Arthur quickly shut his mouth, but he was still terrified of her. She took his hand and said it would take a while to open a spatial rift strong enough to send him home. She showed him many special plants, which would help sustain him while he waited. Arthur felt calmer and thanked her for her help. He picked up a plant, thinking it looked pretty good, and he saw his reflection in it. You thought about your parents and felt sad thinking of them, wondering if they were still alive? Suddenly, you were startled when Miss Voice appeared behind you and told you to eat another fruit, saying this one was better. Arthur sat down with Sylvia, ate a piece of fruit, and asked her if she had a name so he could call her something. She replied that her name was Sylvia. Arthur asked if he could ask her a few questions, and Sylvia agreed, saying she might not be able to answer everything. The conversation began, and gradually, Arthur's initial fear of Sylvia's appearance lessened. He started asking her all the questions he'd been wondering about since waking up from the fall. He asked her where this place was, why she was here alone, where she came from, and why she saved him, along with many other similar questions. Sylvia answered the first question, which was the easiest. She said this place was a narrow area between the Beast Glades and the Elshire forest. No one knew about this place because she had stopped anyone who came near. Though those cases were rare, Arthur was the first person to ever enter this area. Arthur said she could call him Art, since that's what his family called him. Sylvia said she would call him Art from now on. She answered his second question, saying she was here alone simply because she had no one left to be with. Sylvia said she had many enemies who always coveted something she possessed. The final battle with her enemies before she could escape had left her with this wound. She had saved Arthur because his courage and sacrifice had moved her, Or perhaps she was simply lonely after that fight. She stood up and apologized to Arthur for last night, saying her wound was getting infected and she needed to be healthy to work on the spatial rift tomorrow. Arthur wished her a good night, and as he watched her powerful, dark armor-clad figure walk away, he couldn't help but think about her loneliness. She also told Arthur that her vision couldn't pinpoint exactly where they had arrived, but his family and friends were safe. She told him not to worry if he still had doubts. Arthur was overjoyed to hear that they were all safe. He burst into tears, smiling with relief at the news, and thanked Sylvia from the bottom of his heart. After that, Sylvia and Arthur spent hours talking about everything and anything whenever she wasn't preparing for the spatial gate. But those hours slowly turned into days, and those days into weeks, as they spent all their time together. Sylvia never spoke about her own life, and Arthur gradually came to understand the true nature of this mysterious being. During this time, he meditated on his manicore and thought that Sylvia was the living embodiment of the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Contrary to her potentially haunting appearance, Sylvia was kind, gentle, patient, and warm. One day, Sylvia called to Arthur and asked if he wanted to eat some fruit, as they were especially delicious and rarely grew anywhere else. Arthur thought she reminded him of his mother, because she was also so gentle and kind to him. She also didn't hesitate to scold him when he was wrong, and that reminded him of something unpleasant. One time, Arthur had expressed his hatred for the bandits, saying they deserved a worse death if any of them had survived. He was determined to hunt them down. However, Sylvia just flicked him with her finger and sent him flying. He got up and asked why she did that, saying he wasn't wrong, that the bandits deserved to die. Sylvia replied that she hadn't saved the mage he fell with for that very reason, but letting hatred blind you and seeking revenge only brings more harm to yourself. And she advised Arthur to continue living his life with pride, keeping his vision firmly ahead. She told him that even though he would face hardships and misfortunes in the future, he shouldn't let sadness and anger break his spirit. She instructed him to learn from his trials and to face the future with a smile, because only then would he truly be victorious. Afterwards, Sylvia gently caressed him and asked if she had hit him too hard, if she had hurt him. Being lectured so seriously about morality and life by a figure like Sylvia, who seemed to represent evil itself, left a deep impression on Arthur. Hearing Sylvia's voice, he got lost in his own thoughts, and she asked why he wasn't eating the fruit. He smiled and said he was fine, then started to eat. While eating, he noticed that Sylvia's wound was getting worse and worse. She told him not to worry, as her wound was still infected and would flare up with pain from time to time. She also said she understood that humans usually awaken around the age of 12 or 13. She asked him how he managed to form his mana core and use mana so much more efficiently than many accomplished mages. Arthur proudly said that his parents had told him he was a genius, and Sylvia replied that perhaps Arthur would be able to learn this. Sylvia told Arthur to meditate and absorb mana while moving, and possibly even while fighting. If he was good enough, she would get up and show him her mana. Arthur was surprised and asked her how to do that. Sylvia answered that humans have a very linear approach to mana, and that he had to start small, with unconscious movements, and gradually build up from there. Arthur followed her instructions, but he had to admit it was easier said than done. Sylvia said that mana beasts learn to do this naturally, but because humans usually awaken later, their bodies can't handle doing multiple things at once. However, since this didn't apply to him, if he practiced hard enough, he would succeed. Arthur smiled and said he would do his best. Then, he began practicing the technique while Sylvia continued to work on the portal. Suddenly, Arthur lost his balance and fell to the ground. He realized that to truly perfect this skill meant being able to fight masterfully while maintaining a steady flow of mana inside his body. He moved the wooden sword with a flow of mana, and the mana coursed through his hand and up his arm. He was overjoyed and told Sylvia that he'd done it, but he immediately panicked when he saw her lying on the ground, unconscious. Arthur ran to Sylvia's side, frantically asking what happened to her, but when his foot touched her blood, which had pooled all over the ground, he grew even more terrified. He tried to move her with his mana, but she was too heavy, making it impossible for him. He was horrified to see how bad her wound had become. Meanwhile, the portal had opened, and Arthur realized Sylvia's condition was worse because of the very gate she was creating. He remembered the good times they had spent together. He felt a wave of frustration knowing her wound was getting worse just because she was creating this portal. He began to cry, realizing she was doing all of this for him. Hearing his sobs, she called him irresponsible. He kept crying, realizing that she was sacrificing her life for him. He cried for longer than he'd like to admit, crying like a child for the very first time. After a while, Sylvia asked if he had calmed down, telling him they didn't have much time left together. She said she would hate for their remaining time to be wasted on him blaming himself. Arthur asked how he couldn't blame himself, when she was literally sacrificing her life so he could see his family again. Sylvia replied that he was actually doing her a favor by allowing her to leave this desolate cave sooner. Arthur cried out her name, but Sylvia exclaimed that her name didn't suit her current form. Suddenly, her body began to rip apart, and he watched in astonishment as she transformed into a white dragon. She asked him if she looked like Sylvia, and Arthur was still too stunned to process that she was a dragon. Sylvia replied that she was what's called a dragon, but now was not the time for meaningless stories. Now, she had to use her true form to complete this portal. However, once her veil was gone, her enemies would soon come for her. She created a spatial portal and told Arthur to listen to her very carefully. Before they parted, she wanted to tell him a few things. She gave Arthur an object that looked like an egg, and it was so light that he felt like he could barely hold on to it. Sylvia asked him to wrap the object in her wing to hide its aura. She asked him to endure it one more time, and suddenly pushed him backward. Arthur felt a change in his body, and his hands began to turn red. Sylvia said that with this, everything would be revealed when the time came. Arthur noticed Sylvia closing her eyes and worriedly asked if she was all right. She replied that she was opening the spatial portal now, but there was no time to make it lead directly to his home. However, the portal would take him to a place near other people. Arthur said that he couldn't just leave her here alone. Suddenly, they heard a noise from outside. As if someone was trying to get in, a creature appeared and advised Sylvia to stop being so stubborn and give it to him. He demanded that she surrender and promised to heal her wounds. Arthur realized this creature looked similar to Sylvia's previous form. He said that she had caused them quite a bit of trouble. After hiding Sylvia away, she told Arthur she had a confession. She revealed that she had intentionally prolonged the transportation spell so she could spend more time with him. She didn't ask him to forgive her, but she had one last, selfish request. She asked him to call her grandma just once. Arthur smiled, took her wing, and told her to come with him. He didn't know what she had done, but now everything seemed to be frozen. He asked her if they could leave this place together. Sylvia closed her eyes and said they couldn't do that. Then she said goodbye and pushed him towards the spatial portal. Arthur tried to stop Sylvia, but he couldn't. He looked at her one last time and called her grandma. She closed her eyes in relief and thanked him for granting her request. He was sent through the spatial portal and arrived in a place that looked like a forest. He looked around, feeling sad that Sylvia was gone. He cried so loudly that his sobs echoed everywhere. His mind swam with memories of the nearly 4 months he had lived with Sylvia. She had treated him like her own child for a time that felt both long and short. She had taught him the things he had been missing since coming to this world. Suddenly, the spatial portal opened again, and he hurried to turn around to see if Sylvia had come back. He heard her voice, and she asked him to listen to her very carefully. She said that she had shown him what she truly was, and now she had left a message for him. Sylvia said she knew he would feel disappointed and that he wasn't ready to face the truth. His body was only that of a 4-year-old child, but his monocore had already advanced to the dark red stage as a small parting gift. Sylvia had imbued Arthur with her unique will, and his future development as a mage would depend on how he used the gift she had given him. She could imagine what he was feeling right now: sadness, anger, and guilt. But she asked him to remember that she also had a family to worry about, and a purpose to fulfill in this life. The only thing she wanted from him was to embrace the joy and innocence of childhood, and to become a man that both her parents and she could be proud of. When his monocore surpassed the white stage, she would be able to hear him once again. At that time, she would explain everything. Until then, she bid him farewell and called him King Gray. Arthur was stunned to hear she knew about his past life and his name. After that, the questions continued to bother him, long after Sylvia's voice had faded. He wondered how long she had known about his identity. The one thing that was clear was that he had only focused on training for the sake of revenge, and this life would hardly be any different from his last. He could only keep moving forward, but first, he had to figure out where he was. He used the monocore that Sylvia had taught him and ran everywhere to learn about his whereabouts. Arthur reached out to grab a tree branch, thinking that his vision was limited even when using mana. However, one thing was certain, he was deep in the Elshire forest. Even though he could only use the mono-rotation technique Sylvia had taught him, he could now use magic for a much longer time. He couldn't help but wonder how he ended up here. Sylvia had said that he would be near other people, but no matter what, he continued to search his surroundings. He was gradually getting better at moving through the trees. Suddenly, he heard a human voice from the side. He turned around, hoping they could help him leave with them. He climbed down from the tree and saw a carriage heading to one side. Several people were standing around it, and one of them was ordering the others to get ready. He heard them say it would only be a few more days before they left this forest. They were elves, and they were talking about a little girl they'd kidnapped. They were planning to sell her. Arthur realized that they were slave traders, and he saw an unconscious little girl being held captive by them. He didn't know how these people had managed to capture elves, but he knew that rescuing her might be his best chance to get out of this forest. As for those slave traders, after everything that had happened to him recently, it looked like he would finally have a chance to vent his anger. He jumped down from the tree because dealing with the slave traders first was the best course of action. However, he couldn't attack immediately. Attacking all 4 of them at once would be suicide, even for him. So, he decided to follow them, and he waited for the right moment when their guard was down. After a few days, Arthur knew the time had come. He threw a nutshell at a jackal, and the dog started barking. One of the men told the others to keep quiet so as not to wake everything in the forest. With no weapon, Arthur was forced to use a technique from his past life, one he wasn't even sure would work in this world. One of the slave traders went over to the dogs, telling them to be quiet and giving them a piece of meat. Meanwhile, Arthur approached quickly, and he struck him with his entire monocore. Arthur successfully took down one of them, and he pulled out the man's dagger, thanking him for the weapon. Meanwhile, the defeated man's companion was waiting for him, as the pack of dogs had been quiet for too long. He went to check and was caught off guard when Arthur appeared behind him and killed him with the dagger as well. As expected, fighting is really tough and tiring in this body. Arthur told himself that he needed to end this fight quickly. Meanwhile, the other 2 guys had noticed what was happening. Suddenly, their comrades arrived, looking for them and calling out their names. One of them sensed someone was nearby, and he reacted in a hurry to attack Arthur. But Arthur was faster than him, and he quickly got past him, striking his leg and causing him immense pain. When his comrade came over and asked what was wrong, the injured man said that the kid was a mage. He was shocked to find out that Arthur was also a mage, and said they couldn't accidentally kill the golden goose that had just fallen into their laps. He added that he could be worth even more than the elf girl. He appeared from behind and prepared to attack Arthur, but Arthur moved quickly and dodged the attack. Then, he punched him in the face, which made him furious. Arthur used his mana to augment the dagger and prepared to strike again. But just as Arthur was about to make his move, the man snatched the dagger from his hand. The man laughed and said Arthur sure had some cute tricks, then told him to catch his weapon. He threw the dagger at Arthur, who had to dodge the attack. Arthur realized this guy was faster than he'd thought and found himself thrown badly to the ground. The man approached, calling him a sack of gold. He grabbed Arthur's leg, telling him to give up, saying there was nothing he could do in that small body of his. Arthur thought that condensing mana into a blade seemed similar to wind magic in this world, so he decided to use his condensation technique to break free. An explosion erupted, severely burning the man's hand, and he screamed that he would kill him on the spot. Arthur quickly retrieved his dagger and appeared from behind. The man said he'd kill him, not caring if he had to sell his corpse. But before he could do anything, Arthur swiftly plunged the dagger into his neck, finishing him off. Meanwhile, the one remaining survivor begged Arthur not to kill him. Arthur looked at him with a cold stare, thinking that the little girl had also asked them to leave her alone. Then he went inside and called her out. He said that they were safe now and she could go home. Then he gently blindfolded her and led her away from the carriage and the dead bodies. When they were far enough away, he removed her blindfold, and she thanked him for saving her. He was about to leave, but the little girl grabbed his hand and asked how he could just leave her in the middle of the forest like that. Arthur replied that he wanted to go home too, and that the bad men wouldn't be chasing her anymore. Besides, elves were generally safe in this forest. The little girl replied that only monsters were afraid of adults, and she was just a child. Her parents said that children get eaten by wild dogs or tree golems. He asked the little girl how long it would take to get to where she lived from here, but he was shocked when she said she didn't know where she lived. Arthur told the little girl to stay there while he went to gather some supplies for their trip. Then he rummaged through what he could to prepare for the next leg of their journey and stripped the clothes off the slave traders. He thought to himself that it was a shame they couldn't take the carriage with them. But perhaps that was for the best. And he also freed the jackals. He could only hope that the elves would have something to get him back to the human kingdom. Arthur went over to the little girl and gave her some clothes he had found in the carriage. The little girl thanked him for the clothes, and Arthur smiled, saying that they were on their way home. As they walked in the vague direction she pointed, Arthur got to know the little elf girl better. Her name was Tessia, and she asked him how he had ended up in the Alshire forest. Arthur told her the whole story, saying he had just been separated from his family and came from the human kingdom. Tessia asked him if it was true that all human men were perverts and had multiple wives, saying her grandfather had told her so. Then she said that there were perverts among the elves too. Arthur asked her if she really understood what the word pervert meant, and Tessia revealed that she spent a lot of time with her caretakers and her grandfather, since her mother and father were always busy. They spent a lot of happy time together, and Tessia told Arthur that perhaps when she awakened, she would be assigned a mentor to train her. The education system in Elenoir didn't seem to discriminate much, as everyone was assigned a personal mentor upon awakening. That evening, they roasted a rabbit for dinner, and Tessia asked Arthur what had happened to the bad men who kidnapped her. Arthur replied that they had a rather unlucky accident. Tessia asked if they would come looking for her again, and Arthur promised that she would never have to see them again. A while later, Arthur told Tessia to go to sleep and that he would keep watch outside. He thought he would use this time to learn about the will that Sylvia had left for him. Tessia came over to him and asked if he was sure he didn't need a night's sleep. Arthur replied that he wasn't sleepy, and Tessia went inside the tent. She said sadly that the monsters would easily spot him if they saw him outside, because they would see he was just a child. Therefore, she suggested that he should keep watch from inside the tent. Arthur realized she was scared, and Tessia explained that this was for both of their safety, not because she was afraid. Arthur told her to go to sleep, and after a while, she drifted off. As for Arthur, he sat there and also dozed off for a bit. They continued their journey through unfamiliar landscapes, and the passage of time was the only sign of their progress. After Tessia's initial despair and fear had passed, it was clear that she didn't know how to interact with Arthur. Arthur had to admit that his worry for his family and his impatience to get home had put him in a bad mood. However, he knew he had to fulfill his responsibility before he could return home. What made the journey almost unbearable were the intense pains from his monocore, which came without warning. He was in a great deal of pain, and Tessia came closer, asking if he was okay. Arthur replied that he was fine. That same night, he felt the pain in his chest again, and the next morning, as they were walking near a tree, a pair of jackals attacked them. Arthur simply used his monocore and they fled in fear. The pain started coming more and more often, and Arthur didn't tell Tessia because he knew she would only worry. At night, Arthur slept well, thinking that maybe sleep would help ease the pain. As the days went by, Tessia seemed to notice more and more of the scenery around them, even though it didn't change much. However, their pace slowed down as Tessia's body couldn't keep up with the strain of constant travel. She got so tired that she started crying, and Arthur had to carry her share of the luggage as well. As for him, despite strengthening his body with mana, the pain continued to worsen, and it was becoming harder to hide it from her worried eyes. Tessia would rush over and ask him what was wrong, and Arthur had to make up an excuse, saying he needed to use the bathroom. The next morning, Tessia asked if she could call him Art, like his family did, since they were close friends now. Arthur said he didn't mind if she called him Art, but Tessia thought he was being impolite, so Arthur said formally that he would be honored if Tessia would call him a simple country boy, Art. Tessia laughed and said he talked like an old man. Arthur retorted that at least it was better than being a crybaby who couldn't even go to the bathroom without her help. She flailed at him with her eyes shut tight and her ears covered, yelling and telling him to be quiet. Suddenly, Tessia told Arthur she saw something, and Arthur saw something too. He saw mossy leaves, mist-covered trees, and more trees. He thought that despite the mental age gap between them, they had become very close. Then, Tessia started knocking on several trees and told Arthur that they had finally arrived at her home. A portal opened up, and she called for Arthur to follow her, telling him they were going into her house. Arthur stepped through the portal and fell to the ground, thinking to himself how much he hated these teleportation gates. Tessia called out for him to get up, saying they had arrived. Arthur was stunned to see a great kingdom before him, where there were many elves. The sight before him made him think of only one word: pristine. And even that word couldn't fully describe the beauty of the scene before him. Suddenly, a green blur appeared in front of Arthur, and he drew his knife, thinking they were about to attack him, but they were royal guards, who were welcoming the royal princess back to the kingdom. Arthur asked Tessia if she was a princess, and she nodded. One of the guards said they came as soon as they noticed the royal teleportation gate had been used. Meanwhile, the king and queen also arrived and asked about Tessia's well-being. The king's name was Alduin Erelith, and the queen's name was Mariel Erelith. Virian Erelith was a name recorded in every history book. He was the former king who had led the last war against the humans of the kingdom of Sepin. Arthur felt intimidated meeting them, but he gave Tessia a fond look and urged her to go greet her parents. He wondered if his own parents would react the same way upon seeing him. The king bowed to Arthur and thanked him for helping their daughter. As a small token of their gratitude for bringing Tessia home safely, they asked him to accompany them to their palace. He could rest and then tell them everything that had happened. Arthur noticed the king's gentle tone, but his eyes told him it wasn't an invitation, but a command. He bowed before them and said he was honored to receive their request. Suddenly, Tessia grabbed Arthur's hand and asked him to come with her, because there was so much more she wanted to show him. After learning that Tessia was a princess, Arthur had somewhat expected an impressive castle, but what he saw far exceeded his expectations. She led him inside the castle, and he wondered what kind of ridiculous novel he had wandered into. The queen ordered a servant to take him for a bath and show him to a room to rest. Arthur thanked them, but said that he first wanted to explain what had happened. After a while, they sat at the dining table, where the entire royal family wanted to hear his story. Arthur stood up and introduced himself as Arthur Lewin, from a small town in the kingdom of Sapin. He said it was an honor to be in the presence of the royal family. Although the introduction was a bit over the top, he knew the conversation couldn't continue if they kept treating him like a child. The king said that although Arthur claimed to be of humble origin, he seemed quite mature and well-educated. Now, he wanted to hear what had happened. Arthur then recounted his journey, starting with a vague story, saying he had been separated from his family after an encounter with bandits. This wasn't a lie, but a half-truth and an unavoidable one. As the story continued, From the moment he met their daughter, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The king became angry when he heard about the slavers and said that Arthur should have known they were human. He said that slaving is a profession, not a characteristic of a race. The guards immediately drew their swords at this disrespect, but Tessia's grandfather ordered them to stop. He asked Arthur if he had seen the slavers capture her, and whether he had negotiated or begged them to spare her life. Arthur replied that although he was a child, he was a mage and had eliminated the slavers, saving the princess. One of the guards stepped forward, angrily asking how he dared to speak such lies before the king. But Tessia's grandfather glared at him, causing him to shrink back in fear. Arthur stood up and said that whether anyone believed him or not, Princess Tessia had been returned safely, and what he wanted now was to return to his family in Sapin. Tessia stood up, asking if Arthur was leaving so soon and calling him Art, while the king and queen looked at each other, commenting on his frankness after hearing the story. The king spoke up, saying he didn't think it was appropriate for a human to stay in this kingdom for too long. He said his priority was to ensure his family's safety and informed him that his family was also safe. The king continued that, regardless of the history between the two kingdoms, Arthur had saved his daughter and endured hardships to bring her back to them. Therefore, he deserved a worthy reward. However, the teleportation gate to the kingdom of Sapin could only be used once every 7 years during the summit between the three races. The gate wouldn't open again until then, which meant another 5 years. However, the king said they were willing to send a group of soldiers to escort Arthur home safely. He also wanted to extend their hospitality, saying that while some of their people were tolerant enough, too many still bore hatred for humans because of the old war. He asked Arthur to feel at home and that they would prepare the guards for him in the morning. Arthur thanked them for this kindness. Arthur then went to the bathhouse and washed up, and while he was bathing, he felt the pain in his chest worsening. Then, he picked up the egg, wondering what to do next, and wished Sylvia could be here with him. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and it was Tessia, looking at him furiously. She immediately hit him on the chest, saying he had treated her family too coldly and was now preparing to leave. Arthur explained that he wasn't being cold, but respectful, because they were the king and queen of this kingdom. Then he yelled, asking why she hadn't told him she was a princess. Tessia said she didn't want him to leave, telling him he was her first friend. Arthur comforted her and suggested she give him a tour of the castle. She led him to her favorite place in the castle and said that if he stayed until spring, he would get to see all the flowers in full bloom. She said cheerfully that at least he would get to see the globe harvest, and showed him the beautiful flowers. Suddenly, Arthur sensed an attack from behind, and he put the egg down, pulling out his dagger. He dodged the attack, but was shocked to find that the attacker was Tessia's grandfather. He shouted, asking the man if he was trying to kill his own granddaughter. Tessia's grandfather replied that his blow might have left a small bruise on Arthur, but he doubted the toy he was holding could kill anyone. Arthur was stunned, realizing the man was just messing with him. He praised Arthur's reflexes and instincts, not expecting him to be able to catch and use his little gift against him. He said Arthur's ability to use mana was only average, but he also noted how he had managed to kill a few slave traders. Arthur thought this old man seemed a little unhinged. Tessia demanded that he stop teasing Arthur. He replied that she should know why the boy was here, and Arthur wanted to know the reason too. The old man said it had been a long time since he'd met someone so interesting, then handed Arthur a wooden sword, saying they would see what he was made of. Tessia tried to stop him, but he released his mana core and told Arthur to fight him with all he had. Arthur took the sword and tried to attack him, but he dodged the blow and appeared behind him. He prepared to strike Arthur from behind, but Arthur managed to block the attack with his sword. However, the old man was too strong for him. Arthur leaped from behind to attack him, but the man punched him, sending the sword clattering to the ground. Arthur grabbed the sword again and charged at him. But despite using mana and trying to minimize his movements, he still couldn't keep up with him. The old man tried to attack from behind, while Arthur looked for an opening to strike. He jumped up to attack the man, faster than before, and his sword was about to hit the old man's head. But he was pushed away. Arthur fell to the ground, and Tessia ran to his side. The old man smiled and said that maybe he deserved that for being so cocky, but then thought to himself that the boy might have actually hit him. Tessia seemed angry with the old man, and he asked Arthur if he wanted to start round 2. Tessia hit the old man and said that he had treated Arthur too cruelly and that he should have gone easier on him. The old man replied that he was afraid if he went any easier, he might be the only one getting bullied by Arthur. Arthur smiled and said he was honored that the esteemed elder Virian Erelith thought so highly of him. The old man seemed surprised by his words. Then he offered to take Arthur on as his disciple. Tessia was surprised by this request, and the old man asked Arthur what he thought of the offer. Arthur asked the old man if he was serious and said that he was a human. He wondered if humans were even allowed to stay in this kingdom. The old man replied that no one would dare kick him out while he was a student. He knew that Arthur had realized he was superior to other children and that he could teach him things that even the most talented mages in the kingdom of Sapen couldn't. Arthur refused his offer, saying he couldn't accept when he didn't even know what his parents, who had no idea if he was still alive, were doing. The old man asked him if he would allow him to contact them to let them know he was safe, and if that would be enough for him. Arthur asked what the old man meant by that, and the old man told him to wait a moment. Then, the old man asked a servant to take Tessia to wash up and prepare for bed. The old man realized he was being quite impatient, which was related to what he had sensed during their little sparring match. He asked Arthur if he'd been feeling intense aches in his manicore, and if those pains were coming more frequently. Stunned, Arthur asked him how he knew that. But the old man said that more than how he knew, the problem was that Arthur wasn't aware of what was causing his pain. He asked him if he knew about the beast's will. This was a term Arthur had never heard before, but he immediately thought back to when Sylvia had pierced his manicore. The old man said he must know of or have encountered some mono-beasts, and that they were classified into different classes. The old man explained that a mono-beast powerful enough to be classified as A class or higher would have the ability to pass on its will, either to its offspring or to someone it was bound to. He didn't ask how Arthur had encountered such a powerful mono-beast, but at this stage, the power residing within him was doing more harm than good. Arthur said he knew all about this and asked if he had a beast's will. The old man revealed that he was a beast tamer and that it was a title Arthur could achieve once he had completely conquered the beast within him. The old man said he understood how important it was for Arthur to return to his family, but doing so right now would be very dangerous. He touched Arthur and said that the power from the beast's will was too strong for his immature body, and if this power wasn't controlled soon, it would destroy his body from the inside out. The next morning, when he woke up, he felt a heavy sensation weighing down on his body. When he slept, he felt like he had become a monster, a personification of the worries and expectations others placed on him, haunting him even in his sleep. Suddenly, he felt Tessia standing beside him, and she called for him to wake up. He called her a shadow monster and asked her for 5 more minutes. Tessia got angry and asked how he dared to call her a monster. He sat up, and Tessia said his hair looked funny. She asked if he was going to be staying here. Arthur replied that they would surely know the answer after their trip with Virian, and called her Princess Tessia. She pinched his back and told him not to call her princess anymore, but just Tess. Arthur agreed to call her Tess and asked her to get out, saying he needed to wash up and get ready. When he went downstairs, he heard the king's voice. He was demanding that a human shouldn't be allowed to reside permanently in the kingdom. The queen agreed with him and said that while she would always be grateful to him for saving Tessia, allowing a human to stay in the kingdom went against all tradition. The old man said that he was fond of the boy, so there was nothing more to be said. It seemed his daughter agreed with this decision as well. The king asked him to reconsider his decision, but the old man told him to stop and said that Arthur would be under his direct guidance, and he would make sure everyone in the kingdom knew it. Arthur listened to the conversation and thought that the old man could be trusted. The old man looked at Arthur and told him to hurry up, because they had to leave right now. Later, Arthur asked the old man how much longer it would be until they arrived and called him Gramps. The old man was surprised and asked if Arthur was finally warming up to him. Arthur replied that they would just have to see how today went with his mysterious friend. Before long, Tessia had dozed off on Arthur's shoulder. The old man said that she had woken up very early that day and had been pestering him ever since. Arthur looked at her tenderly, saying that being the only princess in the kingdom had forced her to grow up in a lonely environment. She's been hurt so much by both adults and children who pretended to be her friends. Eventually, she became cold and distant, building a wall around herself. In the short time Arthur has been by her side, she has shown him more smiles and laughter than in all the past years combined. The old man thanked Arthur for that, and Arthur was surprised to hear him say it. A moment later, the carriage stopped, and Tessia asked the old man if they had arrived. They came to a stop in front of a house, and Arthur wondered who this mysterious friend could be to make the former king travel all the way out to the countryside. Suddenly, the old man kicked the door and demanded his friend come out. An old woman came out looking furious and said that her ears still worked just fine. The old man introduced her as Renia Darkisan, an old friend and a very special deviant who could help Arthur. Arthur bowed his head to her respectfully, and she snapped back that they'd taken all day and ordered them to get inside immediately. Arthur thought that if she was a deviant, it meant she was like his mother, whose magic didn't belong to the 4 basic elements. He wondered how she was going to help him. He asked her if her magic could help him find his parents, and she told Virion that he had a soft spot for the boy. She explained that she was a diviner, and that while this type of magic differed from one mage to the next, she was very skilled. This meant that no one could hide from her if she chose to interfere. For instance, she knew Arthur was very special, and in fact, she couldn't see all parts of his life, but her eyes had seen fragments of both his past and his future. However, Arthur wasn't here for her divining abilities, but to find a way to let his parents know he was alive. She told Arthur to lean forward, keep his eyes on the basin of water, and focus on the image of his parents as clearly and in as much detail as possible. Once he could see them in the water, he would be able to speak with them. Arthur recalled his mother's fiery red hair, her tanned skin that radiated a gentle warmth, and her slender eyebrows always furrowed in worry for him. He also remembered his father, with his deep blue eyes and goofy grin that could brighten even the worst of days. His silly jokes and simple nature at home stood in complete contrast to his charisma as a leader and a warrior. Arthur hoped that they were still alive. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised to see them inside a house. Alice had prepared a dish, and she asked Reynolds if he wanted to try it. Reynolds liked the beef stew and asked if she'd made it for a special occasion. Alice replied that there was no special occasion. It had just been a while since she'd cooked for him. After moving here, Reynolds helped her into her seat, while Alice thought sadly about the Thai beef stew that used to be a favorite of both Arthur and him. She felt sad thinking about Arthur, because they believed he was dead. Suddenly, they heard Arthur's voice in their minds, calling out to both of them. They looked at each other in shock, and the spoon fell from Reynolds' hand as Arthur said that he was alive. Arthur said they were probably surprised to hear his voice in their heads, and that he would explain everything later. But for now, he just wanted them to know he was alive and safe. Back when Alice had found out Arthur was dead, she had cried so much. He told her he had survived the fall from the cliff. Everyone was so sad at the time, and Arthur asked them to keep this a secret. He was now in the kingdom of Elenoir with the elves. Arthur knew this must be incredibly hard for them, as it had been for him, but he was so happy to know they were okay. Arthur hoped they wouldn't blame each other for what happened, and he was proud of what he'd done back then. If he could go back in time, he would do it all over again. He wished he could go back to see them, but that was probably a bit difficult right now. He felt that he'd contracted some kind of illness that needed treatment. It wasn't dangerous, but it needed to be cured before he could come home. While he spoke, they thought about when he would return from his journey. Arthur said that he wasn't sure when he would be able to contact them like this again. They had moved to a new city, and into a new house, Arthur told them there was a mage there, just like his mother, and it was she who made it possible for them to hear his voice. He promised Reynolds that he would continue to practice magic and combat while he was recovering, and told him not to be surprised if the next time they met, he could actually win against him in a match. Until then, he had to keep their mother and the baby safe. Reynolds and Alice were still in shock, but then they embraced happily. Thinking of their son, Arthur asked them to take care of each other until he returned. With tears streaming down his face, Arthur told the old man that he was ready to become his disciple. Afterward, they returned to the castle, where the king and queen received them, but said nothing. As they were about to enter the castle, the king blocked their path and said that his many years as king had made him rigid and conservative. The queen also placed a hand on his shoulder and said that the king wanted to apologize to Arthur for what had happened earlier, and asked him to accept the apology and consider this place his home. The king said that Arthur was the one who had saved his daughter and was his first disciple, so he would give him a welcome befitting his station. They shook hands and Arthur thanked him for his generosity. Suddenly, Tessia cut in and said that if the king was truly sorry, then he had to let them go play outside. She wanted to show Arthur around the city. After a little while, Tessia got ready and asked Arthur to come with her. They went to see the city together, and she showed him many things at the market. Suddenly, they bumped into a boy, and he rudely said that Arthur had the stench of a human on him. He sneered and said that Arthur couldn't possibly belong here just because Virion showed him a little favoritism. Tessia told Arthur to ignore the boy and leave, but the boy said he wanted to pick a fight with Arthur. He complimented Tessia's kindness, but said that being with a human like Arthur was beneath her. He asked Tessia to allow him to escort her. He introduced himself as Faerith Ivsar, and Arthur, surprised, asked if he was really Faerith Ivysaur. Faerith smugly boasted that he'd heard of Arthur's talent, and that he himself had just awakened while still very young. Arthur mocked his name, calling him Ivysaur, which made Faerith furious while they laughed at him. Then Arthur bowed to Faerith and said he didn't realize he was in the presence of such a venerable genius and would remember to show the proper respect. He then asked to be excused and turned to leave. However, Faerith felt insulted and demanded that Arthur stop, asking if he really thought he couldn't see the sarcasm in his words. Arthur thought to himself that he didn't expect the boy to be that smart, and decided to challenge Faerith to a duel for the honor of the House of Ivsar. Tessia interrupted and asked him how he dared to challenge Virion's disciple, saying that he may have noble blood, but he still needed to know his place. Faerith apologized to Tessia, but said that his father had taught him to never let anyone trample on his pride. He demanded that Arthur accept the duel or withdraw in disgrace, and that his decision would also reflect on his master. Arthur wondered if a duel was really taken so seriously here, and Faerith exclaimed that he would take Arthur's silence as consent and asked Princess Tessia to referee the duel. Tessia looked over at him, but he remained silent. She declared the match to begin, and a large crowd gathered around to watch them fight. Faerith told Arthur to get ready, still boasting as Arthur charged forward. And Arthur threw a powerful punch, knocking Faerith to the ground. Arthur then asked him if the match was over, and Tessia happily grabbed Arthur's hand and led him away. Arthur couldn't help but grow more and more fond of this little princess. The rest of the day wasn't as eventful as the run-in with Faerith. They went to a library, which made him feel relaxed and helped him temporarily forget everything. They also visited a mage and then went to a large, ancient tree. Tessia asked him if he was nervous about starting his training tomorrow, but Arthur remained silent. Arthur recalled what the old man had said. He didn't know what Arthur had learned so far, but he guaranteed that the next lessons wouldn't be easy. He had told him to ignore the pain from his monocore, and that the assimilation process used by beast tamers was often compared to submerging one's body in boiling tar. You will be stranded in a strange land, with no family, no comfort, and even your daily life will become a trial. However, if you can endure it, the reward will be immense. He would then be asked if he was ready. Then Arthur told Tessia that he was excited for tomorrow, that he had come a long way to get to where he was. He was looking forward to the training and to seeing his parents again, and couldn't wait to see what the future held. 3 years later, Tessia woke Arthur up one morning, telling him they were going to be late. She used her mana to dislocate Arthur's ankle. He cried out in pain and asked her if there wasn't a gentler way to wake him up. Tessia replied that he never woke up when she asked him nicely. Besides, he should be grateful that a beautiful girl like her was waking him up. However, she got angry when he said that the maids were prettier than her. As they were walking downstairs, Tessia asked Arthur if he really thought the maids were prettier than her. However, the old man interrupted, saying it had taken them long enough to get to him. He told them to prepare for their lesson,